I have a lot of strong opinions around how the church addresses this as well. So, when you look at statistics, you can say, 7 out of 10 men actively in the church, are struggling with this issue. And once again, when you look at statistics about this, anyways, you kind of have to take them with a grain of salt, because in order to get true numbers, like, you have to have true honesty. So I would tell you that the number is actually probably a lot higher, because there's going to be a lot of Christian men that aren't willing to raise their hand when they say, "How are you struggling with pornography?" But let's just say it's somewhere between 70 and 80%. So that means when you're at church, if there's 100 guys, 70 to 80 of them are struggling with this issue. Yet every
It's
week they're
crazy.
showing up and they're getting taught these principles that we talked about. These principles that you and I have kind of extracted and then articulated into our own form, actually put together into a curriculum to help men specifically with this issue. But the same principles are already there, and they're being taught to you on a weekly basis. Why do you feel, and then you look at, all the churches and groups and everything, they have these purity programs and whatnot. Why do you think there's still a massive issue in the church, like in general, with pastors, with staff, and then just with the attendees? Like, what's the cause of that if the principles are there?
Yeah, it's man, there's so many facets to it. I think the two that are top of mind these days, the first thing is this kind of purity culture. And I don't know how much you've heard about this. I'm starting to just hear like people talk about kind of this distinction between purity culture and sexual integrity. I don't know if you've heard much about it, but I think purity
No,
culture
but
is
love
a
to get
little,
into it.
yeah, yeah. Purity culture is kind of this, I don't know, it's sort of what like somebody like me grew up hearing. It's the don't have sex before marriage. You know, God gave you these urges, but you're to master them. If you don't, you're kind of this dirty, rotten sack of potatoes. It's all about like it's all about purity. It's all about abstinence. That's the whole emphasis. And what it's caused is a lot of disconnect because people feel guilty and ashamed for their sexual desires, God-given sexual desires. People don't know how to manage attraction and temptations, and they start to self-condemn for things that God is not even condemning them for, like finding somebody else attractive. As an example, there's nothing condemning about that. God gave you the attraction. You just have to learn to manage it. But of course, if you're not taught that, or you're not given permission to explore those parts of you in a godly way, you end up just feeling guilty. The only conclusion you can really draw from these messages is, well, then there must be something wrong with me. I must be kind of messed up. And it creates this sort of shaming that I think stops people from getting the help they need, either because it feels out of reach or because there isn't that safe outlet, that safe opportunity where they feel comfortable to open up and they actually believe it can help them. Um, and by the way, I'll round out that thought, and then I do want to mention one other thing. Sexual integrity is more like us having these conversations about it. We're talking about it. We're giving people permission to actually go there and to ask hard questions that might even be a little bit, I don't know, uncomfortable or offensive, but giving them permission to do it and to actually discover the parameters and the principles that the Bible's laid out for us, and see the value of it instead of just living by it because the pastor told you so. Now, to me, the other side of this and why it's such a problem in church is because pastors are struggling. And being a former pastor myself, and being a fourth generation pastor, as in my dad, grandpa, and great granddad were all pastors, I feel like I can at least talk on this a little bit. But you know, when the pastor of a congregation struggles with pornography, he immediately becomes the bottleneck for the rest of his congregation to get free. Because why on earth would he bring something in for his guys to get free of when he himself is struggling? He that's going to evoke this sense of hypocrisy. So leaders not getting help is a huge problem, and in my opinion, it is the problem in Western church for why we're not having these conversations and why people aren't getting the freedom they need. And as a pastor, and I did struggle for a little bit while I was a pastor, it's really hard. So it's not to, again, it's not to shame them and condemn them because it is a really hard place. And most pastors are, you know, pastoring small churches. They don't have a lot of support around them or safe places they can go. And if they do go to those places, in some situations, it means they might lose their job. So like, there's a lot at stake there. And I think those dynamics are making it really, really challenging for the church to make any progress in this area.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that about you and your experience. Like I told you before we started, I wasn't saved until 2018. So I lived 35 years, kind of, walking. I don't know if I would have identified as an atheist, agnostic. Like I truthfully just kind of avoided the whole topic. I was like, oh, you guys are talking about that stuff. Like check with me when you guys are done, and I'll kind of rejoin. Like and maybe it was just cowardice or just the inability to kind of have difficult conversations, but I'm very new, so I'm experiencing and trying to learn and witness and go into every situation like openly while still trying to kind of form my own opinions on things. And I was having a conversation just this past week with somebody, about kind of pastors in general, and I think what you're saying here is so crucial because here you just admitted like as you were working as a pastor, like leading sermons, like you were still struggling with issues. I feel so many people like they see their pastor and it's like they put them on this pedestal of like, oh, that's not another human being, that's somebody that's like above me. And it's not. They're a human being just like you, dealing with all the same struggles and all the same issues. It's just their calling has been to deliver the message and word of God to you. So we have to stop looking at them as like this special, unique individual. Yeah, they're unique and special in their own way, but they're not elevated above you, removing themselves from the same struggles that all humans have. I think that's so important. And then with the
Yeah.
purity, the sexual purity part, maybe this really helps me in the work that I do. Not being raised in that purity culture, like I experienced what life is like, sleeping around with anybody that was a willing participant, and if I ever have the opportunity to speak to young men about it, like obviously I'm going to walk the conversation very very carefully, but it does leave you in this kind of like meaningless empty place. Like yeah, you could have sex, it's all physical, there's no real connection beyond just the physical experience. There's no deeper connection. There's no sense of love and bonding between two souls. And yeah, it feels good for short time, but then at the end of the day, like it's just really really meaningless.